Okay, perfect.
Let's get going and see who shows up.
All right. Well, I'll introduce myself here. I'm Betsy Van Dyke, and I am here to chat a little bit with you all about breeds, different breeds in the dressage world. I've had a lot of different experiences in the past with many different breeds, and I'd love to share some of my observations on that and also answer questions later about what you guys might want to hear about and what I can do to help you with your different breeds. I'm a big fan of every horse should be able to do dressage and every horse should be improved by dressage. So I think that's really important. I'm an FEI dressage trainer myself. I've shown through the Grand Prix on horses that I've trained myself to the Grand Prix. So I definitely have a fair bit of experience with training horses up through the levels from the beginning to the end. And some of those horses oddly bred, oddly sized, not your typical dressage horses. And some of that is what makes it even more fun, I think. So I like to refer to them as the sleepers. They're kind of like the car that pulls up to the light and you think it's just, you know, not going to have any juice under the hood, and then it just takes off and you can't even see it anymore. So that's kind of the way that I look at the horses that come out that maybe have a big old Roman nose and are an odd breed, and you know, nobody looks twice at them and they trot around like a pony in the warm-up, and then all of a sudden they're trotting a CDI trot and everybody goes, where did that horse come from? I didn't even see it in the warm-up earlier. So that for me is kind of an added little bonus when you can make something out of a horse that maybe otherwise nobody would really look twice at. So I'm a big fan of that. Some of the horses that I've worked with over the years that I wrote down a whole list, and I honestly started just running out of room on my piece of paper for all the different breeds I've worked with. I've worked with everything from an Akelteki to certainly all the Iberian horses like the Lusitanos and PREs and Illusions and all of those types. Lots of Friesians. I've gone to the Friesian World Championships and done stuff there. I've worked with knobstroppers, quadrupers. I mean, like some very odd horses, lots of draft crosses. And you know, what it really comes down to is, does the horse want to do it? Do they have a desire to do it? And it's not always a matter of finding out what the horse is capable of, but it's also, should they do it? Because there are horses that you can look at them, whether it's a warm blood or an odd breed of horse for dressage, you can look at them and say, I really think that that horse could do it and it has a real talent for this, but he doesn't want to do it or she doesn't want to do it. And that I find very unethical. So on the flip side, I see horses that, you know, maybe don't really have the body for it and you wouldn't expect it, but they just want to do it and they really have a heart for it. And they, you know, even out in the pasture or when you're riding them, they just keep giving you this feeling like they really want to piaffe, or they really want a passage, or they really want to try something. And you go, you know, you're a 4-year-old saddlebred, you shouldn't want to do this, you know, but you do, and it works. And I think that's something that I've just always embraced. And I look at horses as individuals, every single one of them. I try to get on every one of them and say, okay, what do you want to teach me? What do you want to show me? And I try to listen to them and try to really understand what they want to accomplish in their life, not just what do I want to get out of them. So that's kind of my overall perspective when I approach training horses. I'm going to chat a little bit about some ideas I had based on horses' body types and some of my personal experiences. I'll probably refer to this horse a lot throughout this chat because he is just an incredible example of what to do with a horse that maybe not everyone believed in from the beginning, and a horse that is just really, really, really smart and has used his mind to overcome a lot of physical aspects of his mechanics, and been able to like truly engineer different ways of going than what came out of the womb. So this is a Lusitano that I'm going to refer to, and he was bred for sport, mostly for bullfighting, but for sport. And he was an Interagro Lusitano, so he's well bred, and not necessarily, completely not bred for dressage, but definitely bred more for bullfighting than anything else, and for the working equitation, being very quick to turn and things like that. This horse, we call him Bono, and he is like a little rock star, so it's perfect that he's named like after you too. But he really came to me as a 10-year-old doing, training level, first level with his amateur rider, who absolutely loved him, and he was wonderful, and she could trail ride him and have a good time with him and maybe do a leg yield on a good day, and was having fun with him. He trotted like a pony, has a complete Roman nose, has a, kind of one of his eyes has the big white showing around the iris. Not what you would expect to be something really impressive. He's very narrow. There were people in the barn who literally referred to him as the prehistoric looking horse. And God bless him. Fast forward 2 years down the road, he is legitimately, we're considering putting him in a CBI at some point here in, I2 or Grand Prix. He is absolutely incredible. Oded Shimoni has worked with us, Cesar Torrenta has worked with us, Patrick Persons, Ali Brock, Betsy Steiner, and all of them are like, he comes out, I start warming him up, and they're kind of like, okay, Betsy, he's cute. Like, what are you going to show me here? Because he's like 15-1, maybe 15-2. He's tiny. He moves like a pony until you really get his hind legs underneath him and ask him to pick up his withers, and then his front legs grow by like 6 inches. It's insane. And he just puts springs in his fetlocks, and he just looks like a completely different creature. So that's a great example of taking a horse that was never meant for anyone to be a top Grand Prix horse. And now he's just blown my socks off and his owner's socks off and everyone else around. I'll take another even more unusual breed that I've worked with. A long time ago, I worked with a half saddlebred cross that I really loved, and it was a mare. She's since passed away, but it was a mare that was crossed with a quarter horse, and she was barely able to be a trail horse when I met her. I mean, kind of on and off lame. Definitely, if you tried to canter her, she would just bolt and almost fall down. She would lean in so much. If you tried to canter her the one direction, it didn't matter which way you went, she'd only canter on the one lead. She'd almost fall over all the time. And through just correct dressage instruction, I really didn't ride her that much. The owner did most of the work. I rode her like 1 day a week for a while, and the owner did a lot of the work. And that mare turned into a beautiful, wonderful, solid citizen, second, third level, really productive dressage horse. I mean, went to dressage shows with her amateur owner, just did really, really well, even, mid to high 60s consistently. And this is, again, a horse that had no scope of movement, but, no flexibility. And by the way, all the lameness went away. Another horse that I worked with that was just a real sleeper was a half draft cross that I just absolutely loved. And he had an incredible talent for piaffe. He's the one actually in the picture of the flyer for this this event, this webinar. So his name was Archie, is Archie, and he's just an absolute doll. And he was, I mean, I was able to teach that horse Piaffe in like a couple of days. I mean, it just was natural for him. He totally loved it. Another horse that when you went to canter, he'd practically fall over when he first started, run around like a Shetland pony at the canter. And he was like 18 hands too, so he was big. But he was another one that as soon as he learned how to piaffe and balance and tilt his pelvis, it totally changed his gaits, made him so much more elastic, supple, and just really changed his ability. Now he does flying changes, he does pirouettes, he's, you know, come along very well. And one of the things that you'll start to notice in the trend as I start to tell you about more and more of these horses is that they kind of fall into one or two categories. Either the suppleness of lateral work really makes a difference with them, or the suppleness of tilting their pelvis, i.e. like half steps or piaffe, makes a big difference in them. Another horse that I worked with was an Akelteke, which is a very odd breed. I mean, very rare. There's not very many of them. This horse was extremely hot and nervous at certain times. But on the other hand, he also might freeze and not move at all. And that was almost the worst thing, because then if he froze and didn't move at all, you knew a blow up was coming, but you didn't know when. So he would freeze, not move at all maybe, and then just explode, or maybe he wouldn't, like you just kind of never really knew. And he was built almost like an antelope. I mean, the narrowest horse I think I've ever sat on in my life. He had this super narrow chest, super narrow hips, very, very thin neck, almost like an antelope. Like, I don't even know how else to describe him. And that's kind of how he moved. Like, he had springs, you know, and he would launch himself around his pasture, and you'd think, oh, he might just jump out. I have no idea. But he was incredibly elegant. And he was one that once you were on him, he was pretty good. And I could, for the most part, get, I would say, third level dressage out of him by the time he left my barn. He wasn't with me for very long, actually. He was only with me for, I think, 6 months. And by the time he left my barn, you could mount him from the ground, which was a really big deal, because when I first met him, if you even came near him to get on his back, he would just literally run sideways, absolutely run sideways, not to mention if you tried to put your foot in the stirrup. And this was with no mounting block. Don't even get him near a mounting block. So that was an interesting character for sure. But once you were on his back, he was very productive in the work, and he understood it, particularly if you let him use his ability to go sideways and his ability to be very nimble on his feet and very light on his feet. If you showed him different ways to use that, then he became very capable and much more supple, and started using his back and breathing through his whole back, not holding so much through his body, and lost a lot of his tension through that. So that was the Akelteke. Another horse that I worked with for quite some time was one of many that I worked with that were Friesians. I still have several Friesians I work with now too. But one in particular was a Friesian that was owned by a very dear friend of mine, Michelle Stuck, and he has since passed away, but his name was Giesbert. And he was, I would say, a fairly typical Friesian in the sense of the way he was built, although he had a particularly long neck for a Friesian, and he was a little bit bigger than most Friesians. But he cantered like a typical Friesian, very big and very medieval in his way of cantering. And his trot was pretty typical Friesian carriage-like, And in order to make him more rideable and more manageable for his owner, I really had to focus on getting him to tilt his pelvis, bring his hind legs underneath him, work more towards half steps. In the canter, I had to work much more towards almost a pirouette canter in order to keep his balance when we went forward in the canter. For him, if I were to have just galloped forward from the beginning, he would have completely lost his balance and those feathers would have been flailing and everything would have been lost. I can go on and on about Frisians, but I'll address that if we have more people that are watching that have questions about them. Another breed that I've started working with recently is actually a half Frisian, half saddlebred. Some people call it a Georgia Grand or a Georgia Grande. She's a Pinto, and she's a very interesting character for more than one reason, not just for her breeding, but she's also 8 years old, and I just sat on her for the first time. So she was not broke under saddle beforehand. And so she got a very late start in life as well. And she's quickly becoming one of my favorites in the barn. She's really interesting. Again, with her, it's a matter of getting her to be more supple through her body and not hold through her back, and for her to breathe and use her entire body. With her, it's a very interesting combination because the saddlebred types tend to need more suppling laterally, more shoulder in and travers and renvers and things like that to get them laterally loosened up and moving a little bit freer and not holding so much. But then the Frisians need to be taught to really sit and tilt their pelvis and not pull with their front legs. So she's got a little bit of both sides of the coin going. So we have to kind of make sure that we cover both sides of that with her. On the other hand, maybe she has the best of both worlds, who knows? And that will be yet to be determined. She's only, 3 months under saddle, I think now. So that's yet to be determined. I've worked with a lot of thoroughbreds, both off the track and not. Depending on the way they're built, it can be a little bit different. I did have one that was off the track that was really built very similar to kind of a Black Beauty look. So he was almost a tiny bit Morgan-like in his build. And so that horse I was able to ride a little bit more focused on the balance and tilting of the pelvis. Yes, he needed to become supple laterally as well, but that was a little bit easier to solve on him. He didn't have a particularly long neck. So he actually came along quite quickly. Unfortunately, he passed away very suddenly early on, but we were actually talking about him earlier because he was a horse that went on to become famous posthumously. He was part of Steven Spielberg's film War Horse. He was used in the artwork part of that film. So he kind of had a famous life later, even after his passing. And I worked with several other off-the-track thoroughbreds and not off the track since then that were more typical off-the-track types with the long necks, a little longer, flatter hip, and ones that tend to have a short, kind of choppier stride and cover not as much ground as you would like them to. Of course, they're usually about a little bit better in the canter about covering ground. But again, those types you usually need to supple a lot laterally to get them to breathe through their rib cage and expand through their rib cage, give you a place for your inside leg to connect to your outside rein. And I think that, you know, it's easy with horses that are a little hotter, like some of the thoroughbreds or saddlebreds for that matter. It's easy to get talked into not putting your leg on. You kind of go, oh, they don't need my leg on because they're already going. But then you get sort of to a point where the horse becomes almost ticklish and you really can't put your leg on, and then you can no longer aid them for things, or when you go to aid them, it's a surprise and they overreact and get a little bit too touchy about the aids. So saddlebreds, thoroughbreds, sometimes quarter horses, I tend to focus a lot on inner leg to outer rein. Not that you shouldn't do that with all horses, but especially with those breeds, it seems to be a little more challenging to get them to be soft and supple laterally and to connect from inner leg to outer rein. Some of them are very flexible. It's not necessarily that they're stiff. I've had some Gumbies, especially saddlebreds, that will fold in half if you want them to. But the problem is getting that symmetrical, connected bend, and also getting that connection from their inner hind leg into the outer rein and forward into the outer rein without having them run off, and feeling that when you close that outer rein, you can collect them back onto the inside hind leg for, say, shoulder in or a half pass or whatnot. So when it comes to quarter horses, there's so many different types, especially now. I feel like the breeding of quarter horses has changed so much in the last 25 to 50 years. What used to be, very obvious. I mean, you'd see a horse out in the field and you go, oh, that's a quarter horse. Now it's sometimes very hard to tell. You can have a 17-2 hand quarter horse, or you can have a 14-2 hand quarter horse. You can have a reining bred quarter horse. You can have a Western pleasure bred quarter horse. You can have a halter bred quarter horse, cutting bred, ranch bred. My brother's out in Sheridan, Wyoming, and he has a lot of more ranch bred quarter horses. And then you have polo ponies that are, some version usually of thoroughbred and quarter horse. So there's a lot of different varieties. I tend to look at a quarter horse for their body style. I look at them and I see the way they move. I see the way that they are built and what their angles are in their engineering. And I kind of base some of my perception on that, and then of course how they feel under saddle. If I look at their angles and their conformation and I see kind of an old Spanish barb look about them, much like you'll see with a lot of the ranch horses out in the West, then I'll probably ride them a little bit more with a tendency to go more Spanish in my mentality, the way that I would ride a more Iberian horse. If they have a tendency to have that long, angular, thoroughbred look like the Western pleasure horses, then they're probably going to need to be taught how to push a little bit more and how to connect inner hind leg to outer rein a bit more. And I've worked with a lot of Western pleasure people as well with their Western pleasure horses, and we always can improve their lope, their jog. The way they ride the jog is really not so different than just half steps moving forward if it's done correctly. The lope that they want is with the hind legs pretty far underneath them. So the work that we do towards pirouettes should not be all that different. I could go on and on and on about the different breeds, but in general, I would say that horses that tend to fall into the category of saddlebred, thoroughbred, most quarter horses, certainly Midwest quarter horses that are more often bred for either barrel racing or Western pleasure, that type, they tend to need more work on shoulder in, leg yields, connection from inner hind leg to outer rein. Some of them are a little behind the leg, even if they tend to be nervous and short-strided. So you have to really be able to put your leg on and get that connection. And then when you go to more of the Baroque breeds like the Iberian horses, the Lusitanos, the PREs, the Andalusians, and the Frisians definitely I would put into a similar category. A lot of the draft crosses would go into this category. Some of the pony breeds like Haflingers, I've worked with quite a few of those. They tend to usually fall into this category where those horses have more of an angle in their hip, and they have an ability to really sit. They often have a very strong hind end if it's developed properly. So if you can develop that hind end, you can alleviate a lot of the problems that often come with those breeds, which is kind of running in this very quick, heavy on the forehand frame, where they get kind of pony-like or choppy, or people will say like a sewing machine in the front legs. When you're on their back, they don't have as much elasticity in the way they're landing on the ground, and you want to change that. You want to improve that. So if you want to change that and you want to improve that, the best possible way, in my opinion, is to get the hind legs in order to balance them so they can use their back better, pick up their withers, pick up their front end, and be able to land with thought on every stride. One of the things that I tell students on a regular basis is, are you feeling like your horse is landing on ice? Are they walking? Are they trotting? Are they cantering as though they would land on ice and not slip and fall? Or are they just sort of flailing around and they're going to go slip sliding around like they're on banana peels? You don't want them to feel like they're on ice, slip sliding around on banana peels. So what you can do to improve that is getting them to sit back more, wait on your seat, wait for your half halts, and carry their weight as much as possible on their hind end. A lot of ponies that I've worked with, also one of the best things we can do is teach them half steps, whether that's in hand or on their back. That again reminds them to tilt that pelvis, get it underneath them, and makes them a lot more secure to be able to take big strides with their front legs, or to be able to reach more with their front legs, because they're not landing with all of their weight. If you want to imagine, if you were on ice and you were walking and you were told, reach out with your foot, point your toe before you place it on the ground, you're going to really think about that, and you're going to really make sure that you have your weight properly placed over your standing foot when you do that. And then when you place that pointed toe on the ground on the ice, you're going to do it gently and carefully and smoothly transfer the weight from the standing leg onto the leg that you just placed on the ice. That's how you want your horses to start to think more about the way that they move. And another good example or visual of that would be to watch a gymnast come off from the mat. Watch the way they walk off from a mat. Watch the way a ballroom dancer walks onto the floor or off of the floor. You know, they're walking with grace and elegance, and we want to teach our horses to walk with grace and elegance as well. The different breeds, I don't know that that really even matters, in the sense that all horses should do this. All horses, this should be your goal. But I would say that with different breeds, you just have to take into consideration their engineering of their body, and also their mental capacity, their mental aptitude, from the way that they've been bred for many of them thousands of years. They've been bred, people think that Arabian horses, they kind of get a bad rep. I've started with Arabians. I love Arabians, but I think that they kind of get a bad reputation because they're thought of as being flighty or spooky. I actually have not really found them to be that way particularly. I think they notice everything. And I think that's often misconstrued, and people see them noticing everything and think, oh, they're nervous about everything. Well, Arabian horses have lived for a very, very, very long time. You could even go so far as to say that they've evolved the most, perhaps, from other horses. They've had to really adjust and acclimate to life for a very long time. And I think that they have learned over the years that paying attention saves their lives. So when you're teaching an Arabian how to do something new, you have to show them why, and you have to show them that it's safe and that it's fun and interesting and not boring. If you teach them those three things, they're usually extremely eager to learn, in my experience. So again, you have to kind of take into consideration what they're bred for and what the best way for them to learn might be. So I have another Lusitano in the barn who's very large. His barn name is Goliath, and he is a very different style Lusitano than the one that I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, but he learns very differently. We in the barn kind of call him Forrest Gump because he is not stupid, he just thinks very differently. So we have to really think about everything that we teach him and how to come at it from a direction and a dimension that he understands. And oftentimes he understands things in a way that a lot of other horses, I think, would find too difficult. But he finds not difficult for whatever reason, but the simple way he finds difficult. So, for instance, with him, if you teach him how to do something one direction or at one point in the arena, he might get it that day, and the next day, if you try to do it at a different part of the arena or going the other direction, he will be completely clueless and have no idea what you're talking about. But if you take him back to that exact same location, going exactly the same direction, he totally gets it. And you do that 2 or 3 times, and then you move it just a little bit down the arena and do it 2 or 3 times, and then he's got it forever and ever and ever, and you can do it all the time, anywhere, no matter what. And once he has it, he has it. But he's very like location oriented, and he needs it that way. Once I learned that about him, then it made my life much easier to teach him how to do new things. So they're all very different. Every single one is an individual. I cannot stress that enough, no matter the breed. It doesn't matter if it's a Dutch warm blood or it's a knobstropper. I mean, every single horse should be, in my opinion, treated as a complete individual, and you just have to learn how they learn. My favorite quote from any horseman ever is a quote from the very famous horseman Glenn Randall, and he was the one who trained, Trigger for Roy Rogers, Champion the Wonder Horse. He taught the Black Stallion, the Ben-Hur horses, all these different famous movie horses. And he very famously said, horses are not hard to train as long as you know how to make them understand what you want them to do. And it really, truly is that simple, in my opinion, that if you can understand how the horse learns the best way, then they're usually pretty eager to try to help you out. And it's a lot of fun along the way. So I've had an amazing time with a lot of special breeds, and I look forward to many, many more amazing times in the future. And I'd love to hear about some of your special horses that you've had in your life and different breeds that you've worked with. So feel free, if maybe Ruby can open it up to some questions here for different people to tell me what kind of breeds you have and maybe some questions you might have that maybe I can help with, or some different experiences that you've had with different breeds and what you've learned from them. So feel free to jump in. I'll give everyone kind of a minute here.
All right.
Don't everyone jump in at once.
So I have a quarter horse, and we've shown like all around quarter horse stuff for a long time.
Yes.
Started in dressage 3 years ago, but then got kind of sidetracked with an injury. But what you're saying about a lot of the latter, that really makes sense. I mean, he's kind of lazy.
Yeah.
So more Western pleasure, typical kind of lazy. So thinking about those, working on the lateral, we're doing training level and then starting to move into first level. So any other ideas on really trying to engage his hind end a little bit more? Because the quarter horse downhill kind of thing would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that with us too. By the way, what was your name?
Megan Burns.
Megan, so nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things that I would do with a horse that tends to be downhill like that, and obviously a lot of the times you run into that with the quarter horses now, is just the more you can get them to understand how they can use the angles of their hind end to get underneath themselves, then the more they can prop up their withers and bring their withers up and become more uphill. Even a downhill built horse can move uphill. It is possible. We've done it again and again and again, but they have to really then have the proper engineering of the angles of their bone structure, and you also need to have the muscle in order for them to carry themselves that way. So one of the things that I do a lot with those horses is a lot of shoulder in to try to engage that inner hind leg underneath them and to get them connected into the outer rein. And then what I would tend to do is collect that, say you're doing it at the trot, shoulder in at the trot, connect them to that outer rein, and then collect the trot into a jog while doing the shoulder in, and then make the trot bigger again while doing the shoulder in, and then bring it back to the jog again, and just keep making those transitions in and out of, jog to lengthening of trot, jog to lengthening of trot, all well in shoulder in position, and then do it the other direction. And what that tends to do is it tends to show the horse how to engage one hind leg at a time. So it keeps it real simple for them. That inner hind leg, they engage it. It's almost like, kind of like teaching them how to do squats in a way, in order to have better posture. Get your, bend your knees, get your seat underneath you so that you're not, picking things up with your back. So that's something that I do a lot with those horses.
Okay.
And when they're behind the leg, like it sounds like your horse is, that's another bonus from it, is that whenever you're sending them forward, that's reminding them to pay attention to your leg. And then you also don't just run them off their feet forward all the time, but rather you on purpose bring them back to that jog. And when you bring them back to the jog, the important thing is that you think about keeping their hind legs kind of coming more and more and more under them as you bring them back into the jog, not just slowing down, but rather make the steps smaller, but keep their hind legs close to the front end. And the more you do that, the more they not only get, of course, laterally supple, but they also get a little bit like longitudinally supple, or supple over their back, because their lower back has to kind of come up more when they bring themselves back to the jog, and then it can kind of relax a little bit as you push them forward in the lengthening, and they have to push more with their hind legs. And one thing with a horse that's behind the leg, I wish somebody would have told me this much earlier in my career. They did tell me, but it just seemed like it was so much later. I thought, my gosh, I wasted so much energy in the meantime. They said, just because you can, Betsy, just because you can ride that horse forward doesn't mean that you should. And what they meant by that in this situation was, I was driving every stride. I was keeping that horse going and making him look forward and big, but I was exhausted because every single stride I was doing it. And then the amateur rider would get on the horse and the horse would just go splat like a pancake because that amateur could not carry that horse around the arena like I was. So sometimes just because you can keep them forward doesn't mean you should, which means that you then have to say, I touched you with my leg, you need to go. I'm not going to tell you nicely a second time. I'm going to kick you and I'm going to make you go. And you have to think about it like every time that horse gets behind your leg, a Jack Russell nips it in the hocks.
Okay.
And have that in your mind. Like, I'm not going to carry him around the arena with my lower leg.
Okay.
Because they'll talk you into it.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Just
So that
that's
might be
very
way more
helpful.
information than you needed or wanted, but I hope that
No,
answers.
that's very helpful, especially the exercise with the jog. That makes a lot.
Yeah.
That really, I think, could be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful whether you're in Western pleasure or dressage. It doesn't matter. I teach a lot of Western dressage people too, and that kind of crossover has actually been, I think, very helpful for me in the way that I approach, especially different breeds, because it kind of reminds me again that good riding is good riding. Doesn't matter the tack. If my brother out in Wyoming can jog on the spot, well, then he can be off. I mean, it's the same thing,
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Does anyone else have any questions or some fun stories about their horses? I'd love to hear them. Don't be shy.
So this weekend, I have a thoroughbred and he was off the track and then he went advanced with eventing for about 4 years and then
Impressive.
simultaneously he was also because Reese Koffler helped train him. So he was simultaneously doing 3rd and 4th level dressage, which I didn't know until like this weekend, but I've been struggling to get him to like 1st or 2nd level. And then like I scored a 58% on 2nd level last week. It was not great. But then in a couple of days with the person who trained him up to 3rd, 4th level,
Yeah.
This off the track who's had several careers at a pony club camp, I learned how to actually like collect him. And I looked at the pictures, I was like, that's not my thoroughbred.
He's been conning you.
Yes, he's been putting his haunches in and trying to pull his neck down low. And then I learned about the turn on the forehand. And I was like, oh, look at this.
So what's your biggest problem, you think, with him?
It's definitely he's 20, so he's definitely got the experience to where like he can use tricks like turning his haunches in or getting super hot to avoid work. And so I have trouble staying focused on what I want and more trying to solve the problem of like, oh, he's running now. Oh, his haunches are like way in, instead of just asking for what I actually want.
So maybe just learning how to sort of control the volume of what you want. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that is so nice about a horse that has more training than you is that you can really capitalize on that and learn from it. And if you do make mistakes, he probably knows that it was a mistake and he's probably going to go, whatever, she didn't really mean that. So that's a beautiful thing. And that's why schoolmasters are so vital and so desirable. But one of the things you might want to think about is, do I always have control of my horse's hind legs stepping directly into the hoof print or beyond of their front legs? And it really could be just that simple. Like ride down the quarter line And do I have control, or is he fishtailing around like he's a truck on ice? Ride, a shoulder in down the quarter line and see if you can maintain exactly the same angle all the way down the quarter line. When you start to kind of put a magnifying glass on things like that, you start to really pay attention to your aids and how you are approaching things. And it might be that you are sending a little bit of a loud signal to him, and so then he's over responding, or it's like you're adjusting the volume and it's real sticky, and so all of a sudden it goes way up and blows everyone's eardrums out. So you just have to start to get a little bit more finesse on your volume control there. But it sounds like you're really on the right track. You're going back to the trainer that trained him, which is so helpful because they're going to know all the idiosyncrasies, so let me know how it goes. I'm curious.
Thank you. I will. We have our pony club rally next week, and so we do 2 second level tests and a musical freestyle for pony club in one day. So it's gonna be a lot.
Oh, fun.
See what the scores are and like how much we've improved over a short period of time.
That's great. Well, and I love that you're doing a freestyle because I'm a big fan of freestyles. So that's awesome. What's your music?
I'm doing Aladdin, and
Ooh.
I can't necessarily afford to have one made for me, so I designed the pattern, and I'm also mixing the music together. So for the trot, we're doing Friend Like Me. And then for the walk and canter, we're doing Prince Ali, because it changes just enough to where it's perfect for the walk and canter at different points.
That's perfect. And good for you on mixing your own music. I've done that most of my career, believe it or not.
Thank you. It's really fun because I feel like you get to know your music even better, so that if you're behind or ahead of it, you just and like if you need to turn on the quarter line or whatever.
100%. Couldn't agree more with you. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. All right. Anyone else have any other questions or stories they want to share about their horses?
Well, I'll hop on.
Good.
So my saddlebred just turned 6. I just came off of the young rider circuit with a Grand Prix schoolmaster. So that gave me a lot of education, as far as kind of what we're working toward in this whole dressage journey. But it also got me a little spoiled because I could ask for things and they would happen. And now I have, he's 6, but he's a very, very green 6 because, he was started saddle seat. His neck does not come out of his body the way they wanted it to. And unfortunately, he ended up at an auction, and it was all a big mix up. But anyway, he got very sick from the auction and was worked with a little bit at the rescue, but not much. So I feel like I've kind of started him a little bit more from scratch and building on what I want. But at the same time, some of his past can come creeping out sometimes. At first, when he first came to me, he really was not afraid of contact, but very concerned about contact and would go chin to chest.
Yeah.
And he'd get very tight in the base of his neck and, kind of get sewing machine and nervous, and he would start spooking because he just didn't know what to do. And so I've had him since September. All this time I've been, take the bit forward, open your throat latch, reach, stretch, do whatever. I don't care if your nose is in the dirt, get that bit forward and down. And so now he's very strong and very confirmed with that. And it's starting to be a little bit of a problem because I don't really have a half halt all the time. And I can't really get that suppleness in the mouth and in the tongue that I feel like I need in order to, lift the shoulders.
Yeah.
And I've played around with different bits. I almost feel like I need a double bridle sometimes. I feel like, yes, take that snaffle forward, but I need a curb to say, come back to me,
Yeah.
without, I don't want to ever get him back to the point where he's nervous about contact or the bit. So as I move into suppling more, flexing at the pole some more, I know I want to be very careful about it. And so I'm kind of seeking some guidance about how to do that.
I think that what you're running into is not uncommon. And it's not uncommon just with saddlebreds, but also actually warm bloods, believe it or not, because there are a lot of warm bloods that have a similar kind of a neck and contact issue that you're referring to, where they kind of want to come up and they want to sort of either suck back away from the contact, or you'll also run into kind of a similar problem where they might be strong in the contact, but their neck is very short, one or the other. Both are really the same problem. The hind legs are not pushing over their back into the contact. And when you do go to half halt, nothing happens, right? They just keep going. So they really need to learn how to be on your seat. And that's not going to happen, certainly not for years, if you just sit on them and hope and pray and half halt and half halt and half halt. Like, it's just not, they're never going to just hand it to you. Let me tell you, early on in my career, I did that many times with many horses, where I spent a year just thinking, oh, I'll just, at the walk on long rein, I'll half halt, and one of these days they'll listen. Basically you just condition them to not listen to you more, unfortunately. So I spent a lot of wasted time learning not to do that, and that it didn't really achieve the success that I wanted to. What they do need to understand is how to properly and with acceptance become okay with acceptance with being in a box. And that's tricky. And you have to have some feel, and you have to listen to your horse in order to do that. And that's why those types of contact problems often end up in bad situations, is that not all riders can handle that. The good news is a lot of times contact issues like that end up with a rearing horse or a standing, on their hind legs horse. Your horse isn't going to do that because A, he's a saddlebred and they don't like to do that. And B, he loves to become a sewing machine. Any horse that loves to become a sewing machine never stands up. I mean, they just don't. It's just, they don't go together because they express their energy in a different way. So I love those horses because I'm like, thank God they're not going to flip over on me. I'd rather them dance around and piaffe around and bounce around all day long, or take off even, that's fine, than stand up, which I've had my fair share of those. But most of the time, and by the way, if you have a horse that stands up, push them sideways, push them sideways, push them sideways. I cannot tell you enough. Like, once they understand, it's really the same result that you want from a horse that does what your horse does and a horse that stands up. They are not accepting of being put in a box. They either put their chin on their chest, they stand up, or they get tense. All of those are just different manifestations of the same thing. They're not comfortable with being compressed. So you have to show them how to be compressed without making it explosive. So for me, I almost always ride them in position to the inside a little bit with extra bend. Okay, so I would ride like a 20-meter circle, leg yield out a couple steps, ride shoulder in a couple steps on the 20-meter circle. Every time they get a little tense in their neck or a little tense in their back, push them a little sideways and connect them again from the inner leg to outer rein. Then bring them back with the outer rein and test them a little. Like, close your outer rein, post smaller. I do this a lot in posting, by the way, because I think it takes a little pressure off of them in their back. So I might do a 20-meter circle ride, lots of bend, maybe even shoulder in, maybe even leg yield out a few steps, and I just play with it on the circle. It's not important that the circle stays exactly 20 meters. What's important is, how do they feel in their back? Am I able to sort of make room for my inner leg in their rib cage? And do they connect to that outer rein? And what you'll find is a lot of times they'll make that outer rein loose, and you're like, I can't get them into that outer rein. Right? Yeah.
That's totally what's happening, especially going right, because we have a beautiful shoulder in tracking left, and I can do everything tracking left, but tracking right, that outside rein is just loose,
like
flapping in the wind, and then I take it back and I ask for a little inside flexion, and he gets so short in his shoulders, he feels like he's got 3 wheels, and he's just going around, and he's almost kind of starting to amble a little bit, because I'm sure they tried to teach him how to rack. I'm like, no, take the energy out, but it's not happening.
So the thing that I think in that moment, what I would tell you is, don't be afraid for it to get ugly. Okay, like, stop trying to make it pretty in that moment and say, okay, let's keep it very simple. This is it. Inner leg to outer rein. And if you have to, God forbid, let go a little bit with your outside rein and let him blow that shoulder out until he figures it out. And I know that sounds like blasphemy from a dressage trainer, but you kind of need to show him, like, it's okay for you to take your shoulders this way. Because at this point, he is like afraid for his balance. Not because you've made him afraid, but because his own balance. So, flex him to the inside. If going to the right is the problem, flex him to the inside. Take your outside rein actually a little away from the shoulder, just a little bit. Don't throw it away. Don't drop the rein. Just take it literally to the left a little bit and give him a little room until he moves over, and then smoothly take back up that contact a little bit until he starts to go, oh, I can touch that rein and I can still keep my balance. And the more he gets scissoring kind of, or sewing machine like, the more you need to flex him. You have to be a little cowboy in that moment and just say, no, I'm going to take your neck away from you because you're using it against me. This is the reason the cowboys do this, is they have to get very far, very quick on these young horses. And so they basically take their face and their neck out of the equation, and they just say, we're not going to let you have it. Now, we don't want to go there all the time with our horses, but at this moment, he might need that once in a while for him to just try it. It's like when you take them up to the water and they don't want to put their foot in the water, and you have to sort of flex them and shove them into the water a little bit, one step, and then they touch it and they go, oh, okay, I can walk, like this isn't the end of the world. And then what he needs to really do is be able to connect to the outer rein. Once he does, once he's consistent in that, and you can leg yield out on the circles, first of all, you'll have a very different feeling, and he'll feel so much better in your hand and in his back underneath you. But then you need to be able to start to compress him a little bit. And not unlike what I was telling the gal with the quarter horse, bring him back a little bit, almost towards half steps, in shoulder in, send him forward again. Bring him back a little bit, send him forward again. So that he starts to learn, I can compress and it doesn't become combustible, I don't have to blow up when I compress. And they start to learn that they can just tilt the angles of their pelvis, I have a horse on this portrait behind me here, and you can see he's almost like bowing, right? So he's just changed the angles of the way that he naturally would stand in order to make that happen. You just have to basically do the opposite with the hind legs. They just need to take their pelvis from this sort of flat pelvis and be able to do this a little bit so their back raises up, and starts to arc a little bit more. So I hope that makes sense, but I think it might be just helpful for you to know, like, that's normal also for that style of horse too. Like, doesn't surprise me, and that's normal. And this is the hard part. It gets a lot easier.
Yes, thank you. I'll definitely try that. And I hope, as I can get him connected and not so afraid of the outside rein, I can give that half halt and he'll yield to it instead of brace against it, like, no, don't touch me. at least he's not getting so sucked back in the canter, because that's when it would get scary for me, because I couldn't
then you have nothing
steering or anything.
Yeah.
And I actually put him in a running martingale, because
yeah
it was getting to the point where he would get his head up and run off and scare himself,
yeah
because he couldn't
yeah
feel me anymore. And
Yeah.
you know, now if he loses his balance, he feels some contact, he's like, oh, okay, I'm fine, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He needs you to hold hands with him, otherwise he's afraid to cross the road by himself.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, well, I hope that helps too. And you know, another thing to keep in mind with him is, you know, when you do get that bend, when they are connected from the inner leg to outer rein properly, then it should feel like you're compressing an accordion to, you know, make music that way, so that when you close your inner leg and your outer rein towards one another, that then it ends up feeling like you have, you know, this compression, and they understand it and they accept it, instead of feeling like they have nowhere to go. And by allowing him to blow his outside shoulder out, and I wouldn't tell you to do this with a very older trained horse, but with a younger, more green horse like this, it makes a lot of sense to kind of give them a little bit of an out, so they don't feel so claustrophobic. It kind of lets them blow off a little steam. It's also a very good thing to do when you're on a horse that feels like it's about to erupt, and they're really nervous and, you know, feel like something's coming up behind them. If you can just let them diffuse a little bit of energy out their point of shoulder, a lot of times you can let go of a few things and move on. So, does anyone else have any questions or any stories about their horses? I don't know if we have any more that want to talk.
I'll be happy to talk.
Yeah, don't
All
be
right.
shy.
Here, I'll try to put my face back on the video here. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Hi.
Hi.
So I have a homebred. He's a Connemara thoroughbred.
Ooh, fun.
Yes. So I invented his mom. She was an off-the-track thoroughbred. I invented her through intermediate, and I actually bred him to be an event horse. So I did invent him as a 4-year-old, and then I realized I was a chicken and didn't really like jumping anymore. So then I said, I think I have a really talented dressage horse on my hands, and he is fantastic. He is half pony, so he's very smart and can be naughty. We actually call him the Princess Pony Mare. So everything with him is like riding a mare, and it's, you know, letting him think that it's his idea. My challenge with him is always that he does get, you mentioned being claustrophobic. He gets claustrophobic, and when the pressure gets on, he's like, not really sure about that. And then he likes to wiggle. He's so freaking athletic that he can just move everything anywhere and tries to get out of things. So if I can really just keep him straight and underneath himself and honest to the connection, all of this stuff is easy. And we started showing pre-St. George last summer. So
congratulations. That's a big one.
Thank you. So he's been good, but we're still fine tuning, you know, things like the pirouettes, where he still wants to either like throw a hip or throw a shoulder. And just that honesty is our biggest issue for him.
With the pirouettes, one of the things that just popped into my head that I think is super helpful is if you have him really honest, from the inner leg to outer rein connection, and you come into the, say, a half pirouette, like in the pre-St. George on the diagonal, if you come into it like in shoulder in, and then you start to turn the withers around the hips, make sure you're not only sitting on the inside hind leg, but you're sitting on the outside hind leg as well. And I think that's something that gets neglected a lot. Like we think, okay, we have to turn them and like don't lean to the outside, which is accurate. But a lot of times if we're not careful, we don't sort of protect that outside hind leg from stepping out, they'll swing it out and lose their carrying power.
Right.
So that's kind of like an easy, quick little fix on that aspect. I also am a huge fan of doing loads and loads of quarter pirouettes. I think they're really helpful. But when it comes to just making him be honest, and if he's a wiggle worm, he's probably one that very quickly throws the weight onto the forehand and swings the hind legs around, I would imagine.
Yeah, he especially likes to just throw his haunches to the right. Always.
Okay, well, there you go.
That's his go-to.
Yeah. So then what you might want to practice is, some people would say like, well, then ride haunches into the left, but I don't actually know that I really agree with that. What I would say more is, can you ride on quarter line and super, super collect him on the spot, on the straightaway? Don't turn. That's going to be hard.
That's our biggest weakness, and that's where it comes out. Yeah.
Yeah. Because what he's learning to do is just sort of displace, he's kind of smoke and mirrors, it sounds like a little bit like, oh, look over here so I don't have to do that thing or whatever. Maybe he's a little weak in the right hind leg, and so you just have to think, okay, nope, whatever you do, I don't care where you put your head. I don't care what what canter stride we have, but you're going to keep both hind legs underneath my seat bones, and we're going to just stay here until you figure that out. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. You're so cute.
He likes to help too.
Oh, so yeah, a big fan of just collect the canter on the spot on straight lines, especially off the track.
Right.
And that is just puts a magnifying glass on things. And then you start to realize, ooh, I'm not really riding in between my legs. I'm just steering him,
Right.
Always, I tell this to my working students all the time, and it really should be told to everyone, I think. I always try to ride every horse I'm riding with the idea that not only are they going to become a Grand Prix horse in the end, even if I know they're not, but that's the idea. And
Right.
I always think, not only are they going to be a Grand Prix horse, they're going to be a Grand Prix horse that an 80-year-old, frail, brittle woman is going to have to ride. And can you make them that way?
Right.
You have to train them with that in mind. And if they don't get there, fine. But it's like the whole shoot for the moon and you'll end up among the stars, So
Right.
try to think that way. Like, can I ride him on quarter line, collect the canter on the spot, and could an 80-year-old or 90-year-old or whatever, very tiny little woman be able to do it who doesn't have much strength?
Perfect.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Goals.
Yeah. Anyone else? So cute. Yes. Hi, buddy. Says, I've got a question. He says, I'd like more treats.
Actually, he wants to know why he's not the favorite. He told the animal communicator that he was really pissed off because Shiloh, my horse, is the favorite.
Oh, gosh. I'm pretty sure that all of our animals would probably say that, actually. I'm sure they all wish to be the favorite. Did you have something, Ruby?
I would think if Jerry and Bridget, anything you all want to say, and if not, then
wrap her up.
And big thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Bill, who's
I see a message.
KDA president, this is from our president. He says, thank you so much for giving KDA time on a Sunday afternoon. I am recording. And yes, I will share this recording with everybody, and anyone who signed up and was a no-show, as the TDs would say at the horse shows, I will send this to. And so your information will be shared far and wide.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so glad that we were able to do this, and I'm honored for you guys asking me, so thank you so much. Oh,
yes, we'd love to have you again anytime, and
it'd be my pleasure.
Hopefully, I would love for you to be able to come up in person and give us a clinic.
That'd be so fun. I haven't been to Kentucky in a while, and I love that area, so that'd be great.
Well, we had a blast with you. Thank you so much, and we'll be in contact then.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you all so much for your time as well, and it was my honor. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you on
Thank you.
behalf of the thoroughbred dressage owners.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I love all the breeds. It was my pleasure.
All right.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Well, I will sign off.
All right. See ya.
Ciao for now.